but a good foundation. But there's some really big, important issues on defence spending, on welfare reform, where Andy Burnham, I think, really has to grasp the moment. Because there's a feeling in the country that politicians just can't deliver, and he's got to be shown to be delivering and delivering fast.
Now, it is time for WTF, the week that finished, looking back at a busy news week with an esteemed panel of political big brains. Today, I'm joined by Michelle Donelan, former Conservative Culture Secretary, and Sir Ben Bradshaw, former Labour Culture Minister. Good afternoon to you both.
Hello.
Sorry, just had to cough briefly, and apologies for that. Now, Monday saw the resignation of Sir Keir Starmer less than 2 years after he came to power on the back of a landslide majority. Outside Downing Street, the Labour leader was audibly emotional.
The question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. I have heard the answer of my parliamentary party to that question, and I accept that answer with good grace. Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party. I have spoken to His Majesty the King this morning to inform him of my decision.
Ben, do you feel sorry for him?
Yes, I feel sad generally. I think history will be much kinder about Keir Starmer than the current popular political narrative. We certainly the Labour Party, but I also think the country's got an awful lot to owe him for how he wrested back control of the Labour Party from the far left, expelled all the anti-Semites and returned the party to electability in an astonishingly quick amount of time, when nobody, I think, after that 2019 defeat expected or had any hope we might be back in government after one term. But I don't think he made the transition to Prime Minister as successfully as he might. I think the government's been doing a lot of good things. I don't think it's been very good at communicating about them. But clearly, when you've lost the confidence of the majority of your MPs and ministers, the game's up. And I think the way he handled his departure was characteristic of him. It was gracious. It was putting the national interest first, and I wish him all the best for the future.
Michelle, you've been up close to Conservative Prime Ministers who've had to quit, and there was all the kind of psychodrama of the previous administrations. Yeah. Did you feel a sense of sort of, sympathy for him at least?
So I think on a human level, the guy has lost his job, something that he's strive to achieve for years and years and years. But at the same time, it's very difficult with him in particular because of the hypocrisy. He was the first to always throw the stones when they were in opposition, and to present himself as somebody who was going to be whiter than white. He was nicknamed Mr. Rules. And then as soon as they came in, we had the Suitgate, we had saga after saga, we had U-turn after U-turn. And therefore, it is harder to be sympathetic to him in particular. But of course, on a human level, it must have been a difficult day for him. That said, it was very long coming, wasn't it? I feel like this whole thing has been dragged out, and he personally made it harder for himself. And I can understand why. He was trying to grip hold of that power and that position. But certainly the writing has been on the wall for a very, very long time. But in typical Starmer style, it was overshadowed by the heatwave somewhat. So even the resignation of the Prime Minister and his big moment, I felt, was not as big as it could have been, because everybody was tuned out and focusing on the heat, which was a bit ironic.
Well, and we'll come on to talk about the heatwave in just a second. But what did you think about the moment being drowned out, overshadowed, if you will, by Steve Bray blasting out "Ode to Joy" on the speakers at the end of Downing Street, Ben?
I kind of think.
Sorry, just ask Ben that question first, Michelle.
Sorry.
Well, actually, it's interesting. I watched the thing live, and then I watched it again. And for somehow, I don't know how you guys do this, but in the media, they'd taken a different strand of the recording, which actually was much easier to watch and to listen to. So, it was really irritating, but it didn't, you could hear what he was saying. And I think, good for the media for stripping out that background noise in the version that they probably used, I would imagine, in most of the main bulletins.
Michelle, everybody, I assume, would be all for freedom of speech, but does this go beyond that?
he's sort of become part of the furniture, hasn't he, in Westminster and the Westminster bubble. And at any moment in time, that he will be shouting. So, of course, we do have to have freedom of speech. And some people's freedom of speech can be annoying.
But is it antisocial behaviour?
Is it what, sorry?
Is it antisocial behaviour at the end of the day?
I don't think so. I mean, is it appropriate? No. Is it disrespectful? Yes. Does he have a right to be loud and air his opinion? Yes, too.
Do you think it's antisocial behaviour, Ben, and should be treated as such?
No, we don't have a right not to be irritated in our democracy, thank goodness. Irritating as it might have been. I think the irony, of course, is that Keir Starmer did his best to try to avoid the hard Brexit that Steve Bray has been campaigning against for years, and it has been making good progress at restoring our relations with the European Union. So I think picking on this moment was particularly tasteless.
There was definitely an irony there. Well, of course, as the Prime Minister resigned and music blared out across Downing Street, helicopters were following Andy Burnham's train and then taxi from Manchester to Westminster. He was then sworn in as the new Makerfield MP.
We now come to Andy Burnham, member for Makerfield.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Ben, would you ideally have liked a contest? Because it looks very much like this will be a coronation, doesn't it?
Yes, I think on balance I would. I think I would have liked to see Andy Burnham and anybody else who wanted to put their name forward tested and scrutinised. But I can understand why in the end that wasn't going to happen, because if it's true that Andy had the support of more than half the PLP, I mean, what would have been the point of somebody like Wes Streeting or somebody else challenging and prolonging the uncertainty? And I think that the argument that the British people are fed up with the sort of psychodramas of rotating prime ministers and leadership campaigns and just want the government to get on with delivery is very strong. So I can understand why that hasn't happened, but I do have a slight problem with people becoming prime minister when they haven't had to answer some of the difficult questions of about what they would actually do. But of course, Andy will be doing that with spades now.
Well, there's already seems to have been a bit of a poll bounce for Labour as a result of Andy Burnham's impending leadership. Does that worry you, Michelle?
No, I mean, I think that Andy Burnham is riding high at the moment. He's coming in there very, very strong. And I completely agree with Ben that it would have been beneficial had there been a leadership contest within the party, because it would have given him that mandate from the party, from his perspective. But equally, it would have boxed him into a bit of a corner too, because what happens in those leadership contests is that they're talking to their parliamentary party and their membership at large, and not to the country. So then they end up making promises that are much more in tune with the base than necessarily the country. And obviously he wouldn't have had the luxury of seeing the books, going through the details, etc. And they can be boxed into positions that then they regret when they come into office, or again, they make false promises. So from his position, it's beneficial, but also a disadvantage.
Ben, do you think he'll end up having a pretty short honeymoon, because there are so many massive challenges and there's such huge difficult problems, whether that's welfare or, climate change? We'll go on to talk about Heatwave in a minute. These are things that successive administrations have found it very difficult to tackle. So do you think he's got a sort of abrupt reckoning coming?
Yeah, I think in the current political and economic context, any honeymoon is likely to be short-lived, and he really needs to make use of that initial honeymoon to take some of the tough decisions that perhaps his predecessor shied away from. I mean, as you're right in saying that the UK faces some really very serious challenges post-Brexit, post-COVID. And I think he inherits, I think Keir Starmer was right when he said he's leaving a country in better shape than he inherited it, but a good foundation. But there's some really big important issues on defence spending, on welfare reform, where Andy Burnham, I think, really has to grasp the moment, because there's a feeling in the country that politicians just can't deliver, and he's got to be shown to be delivering, and delivering fast.
I just want to bring you some breaking news, actually, which I think both of you might have some views on. This is a post from Donald Trump on Truth Social, which has some relevance, really, for the UK. He says that numerous European countries have been discussing the imminent implementation of a digital services tax on American companies. Some of these countries are close to actually doing this. Please let this statement serve to represent that any country that imposes such a tax will immediately be met with a 100% tariff on any and all goods sent to the United States of America. This tariff will supersede trade deals made with the country, whether implemented, signed or not. Additionally, the 100% tariff will be immediately imposed if they proceed. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Well, Ben, I mean, this could have quite an impact on the UK, and we were talking there about a short honeymoon for Andy Burnham, potentially. It's issues like this that can end up sort of swallowing a government's agenda, can't it?
Well, and the whole of the rest of the world as well. I wish we didn't pay so much attention to what President Trump tweets.
You just said Boris Johnson. You're about to say Boris Johnson.
I know, but he'll say something completely different next week and the week after, and he'll keep changing his mind. I want my news to be based on facts and what's actually happening, rather than President Trump's erratic tweets. To be honest, we'll deal with this in the normal way, but. I think the lesson about President Trump is don't show him too much attention, and also, stand up for your own nation's interests. And I think that's what Britain and Europe will do on this issue.
Michelle, do you agree with Ben? Best ignore this one.
No, I think there's a grain of truth in what Donald Trump is saying here. So obviously don't want us to face these high tariffs, etc. But I think that the warning shot is the right one to make, because it would be preposterous if we were introducing this digital taxation, because we have to live in the world that we actually, the era that we live in, and not hark back to the past. And therefore we have to embrace technology and the digital age and work out how we can best therefore grow our economy and our businesses here. But that doesn't happen by punishing some of the largest players in the market. So I think it's a good warning shot for him to send, but the majority of what Donald Trump sends out on Truth Social does have to be taken with a pinch of salt.
More from Ben and Michelle in a moment, and after 6 p.m. we'll have The Ladder with Mary Lou McDonald, the president of Sinn Féin and leader of the opposition in Ireland. Here she is telling me about the mood when the Good Friday Agreement was signed.
It was a mixture of things, a mixture of real hope, and remember the extraordinariness of all of this in the midst of a conflict that had been deemed to be intractable, something without solution, because our troubled relationships with you, dear listeners, our next door neighbours, is centuries long. So a mixture of hope and I think anxiety as well.
That's Mary Lou McDonald, president of Sinn Féin, coming up after 6. This is Cathy Newman at Times Radio Drive with ServiceNow. Learn how they put AI to work for people at servicenow.com. WTF, the week that finished, with Ben Bradshaw and Michelle Donelan. We have been seeing more records broken today on the heat. Temperatures continue to rise. And I've been speaking to Dave Swallow, Wildfire Deputy Lead and Tactical Advisor for the National Fire Chiefs Council. He told me how they're adapting to recent wildfires.
Fire service has been dealing with wildfires for years. They've always dealt with wildfires. And if we take Derbyshire as an example at the moment, fires in that part of the Peak District have occurred, for decades, and fire service has been up there and dealt with them. But what we've come to realise in the last few years, the last probably 10 years or so, is that with our weather conditions changing and the climate changing with it, we're having to adopt more Mediterranean style of firefighting for wildfires. And actually only last week we had a national capability that went live, and it's been used in the last 24 hours in Derbyshire around adopting slightly different tactics, primarily around the removal of fuel ahead of the fire. And part of that is including burning the fuel as firefighters as well.
Michelle, we've had a fascinating series of messages from Times Radio listeners about the kind of havoc being caused on the railways and the fact that the rails that we use are part of the problem. And I suppose in the last few days it's really come home to me just how ill-equipped Britain is in terms of its infrastructure to dealing with this kind of heat. How have you found it? You look like you're in a basement somewhere, which perhaps will help you.
I do. I look really dark and ghost-like in it. It's not. It's basically we've moved all of our lives into the sitting room, and we've got all the curtains shut. Because my house is loads and loads of glass and loads of windows, so it's the worst house to be in this kind of a heat wave.
Well, there you go. I mean, all the way buildings are built in the UK just isn't coping with this heat, is it? And we've been far too slow, haven't we, as a country, to prepare for this?
I always think that we're really bad at all extremes in this country. We're really bad at when it's snow, the trains stop. When it's torrential downpours and storms, we have issues. When it's heat waves, we have issues. We just don't seem to do well with any kind of extreme. But obviously, we've not been used to these kind of extremes so regularly before, but we are going to have to get our act together because more is going to come, and we know that year on year this is going to get more of a problem, and we are going to have to prepare ourselves both from an infrastructure perspective and a provision. Now, the government sent out that guidance, for instance, saying schools should try and stay open. A lot of the schools here in Wiltshire closed for at least 2 days this week because they just didn't have the facilities to cope with it. It would have been dangerous. They didn't have aircon, etc. And so we're going to have to look at these issues really seriously and say we need to make sure that our public buildings at least are going to be ready for this kind of weather.
But Kemi Badenoch said we all make too much of the heat in the summer. What did you make of that?
I think that the British public talks about the weather all the time, and it moans when it's too hot, and then it moans when it's raining, and I'm sure that we'll be moaning next week. But this weather is extreme, and we've seen deaths during this weather, and we've seen people ill-equipped from an education point of view to deal with it in terms of their activities. That's led to potentially some of those fatalities. And then we've also seen how schools have closed, like I said a moment ago. Hospitals have battled the weather. So actually, it is actually an issue where we need to improve some of our capabilities, and I know that it wouldn't be popular with the Labour Party per se, but I think that we do need to start installing aircon in most of our public buildings and take the sort of stigma out of that.
Ben, do you think this will make people take climate change more seriously? The fact that successive records have been broken on successive days.
I think it will. I think it already has. I'm speaking to you from Sicily, where it's a very comfortable 28 degrees. But I'm in a house with outside shutters, which we shut during the day, which keeps the heat out. We have ceiling fans. We don't need air conditioning. Completely unnecessary if you have decent ceiling fans and ventilation. You open everything up at night, and we've just had all of our land cut because you'd have to do that by law here because of fire risk. And I suspect that's something we're going to have to start doing in the UK as well. But no, I mean, there are lots of things we need to do. We need to both do mitigation, but actually also tackle the problem at its root, which is global warming, which is why the transition to clean energy is absolutely essential and more important, I believe, than ever.
So do you think that Andy Burnham should press ahead with those net zero targets, despite people saying he should dial back on it to ease the cost of living?
I think there are things that I don't think it's as either or. I think you can press ahead with the net zero, but you can do things that mean that the cost of paying that is not going on people's bills, but are coming from other sources, perhaps general taxation. And I think there probably will be a decision in favour of the two outstanding issues in the North Sea, simply because that's a legal issue. It's not really a policy decision. So, I mean, I don't think you'll see a major diversion from Andy Burnham away from this, because I think the imperative is stronger than it's ever been.
Right. Lots of texts coming in from listeners. People very exercised by Steve Bray's protest. David says, for external press conferences at Downing Street, to have Steve Bray blaring out music is antisocial and should be treated as such. Blare music before and afterwards, but during a historic speech where the audience is the country, it's not acceptable behaviour. You can still protest, but not drowning out the event. And Susan says, antisocial and disrespectful. Police would come out if it was outside any other house. Just finally, returning to our top story, our top political story, really, there was a fascinating little snippet in The Spectator, which we've referred to a few times on the show, talking about Andy Burnham being effectively the first female Labour Prime Minister, and the reason being that he had a passion for female-orientated issues, much less so with the bombs and budgets. And the idea was this was attributed to a senior party source in The Spectator. He was the first female Prime Minister for Labour in all but sex. Michelle, what do you make of that, having had several party leaders who are women yourself?
I think this whole thing is quite preposterous and disrespectful and demeaning, really, because look, come on, a man can care about issues that are normally associated more with a woman, because things like education are universal. Also things like women being safer on our streets. Men have wives, they have mothers, they have daughters, they have sisters. They have a vested interest in that being a top issue too. So I think that the origin of this is just absolutely bonkers. And it made me think, if the person that was actually articulating these comments really meant that he was trying to be derogatory to Andy Burnham and say, oh, he's just a bit of a woman or something, because it just made no sense at all.
Here's Labour MP Ferriol Clark on this extraordinary comment.
I thought it was mad. I just thought, who on earth actually thinks that, and actually not only thinks that, then thinks it's a good idea to brief that to the media? I mean, absolutely bonkers. It is really something really disappointing that we've not had any women coming forward. But that comment was weird.
Ben, do you agree?
Well, yeah, I always treat these unattributed briefings with a pinch of salt myself, particularly to right-wing newspapers. But look, I think it was a silly comment if it was made, but I can sort of see what they're getting at, because I think the thing about Andy Burnham is he's what we used to call a new man in my time, which is somebody who treats women as their equal, who gets on very well with women on a personal level without there being any kind of, any other kind of agenda that is not macho, and actually is inclusive in his politics. And I think if what the person was trying to communicate was those things, then perhaps they could have worded it a bit more sensibly, but it probably wouldn't have got the headline.
But it is a source of great embarrassment, isn't it, that Labour, the party of equality, has not had a female leader and isn't going to this time?
I just think it's the way the cookie crumbles. We haven't had the right person in the right job at the right time.
But that's bad, isn't it?
I think, but there are several great Labour women who I think could have been Prime Minister, but there's a lot of luck involved in politics, and a lot of luck in terms of timing.
Right.
I don't think there's anything sort of deep or significant to read into the fact that we haven't. But I hope we do. But we're not going to this time.
Well, Ben, we could have continued this conversation. Much more to say on that, but we're out of time. Ben Bradshaw, Michelle Donelan, thank you both very much for chatting. WTF, the week that finished.